Chapter 5. A Terrible Loss. Anne became very ill. Anne was 70 years old, and all the work she had done caused her to go blind again. However, Anne was not sad. She had seen Helen grow into a successful woman despite her disabilities. Anne had also seen new organizations and schools being established all over the country. She had much to be satisfied with. Helen sat by Anne's sickbed for many months. She and Polly took care of her as best they could. When Anne died, Helen was holding her hand. Helen felt almost as if she had died also. She and Anne had been together for almost 50 years. Helen was the saddest she had ever been in her life. "A light has gone out that can never shine for me again," she said. A short time later, an official telegram came from Japan. It was from the Japanese government. They wanted Helen to come to Japan and help them begin work for blind and deaf people there. Going to Japan required a long trip across the Pacific Ocean, but Helen decided to go anyway. "There are many blind and deaf children in Japan," she told Polly. "Many of them have no teachers. We must help to build schools for them, just as we are doing in America." Helen and Polly received a very warm welcome in Japan. Also, enough money was raised to begin several new schools for blind and deaf Japanese children. The Emperor of Japan was so grateful that he sent a personal thank you note to Helen and Polly. One afternoon, one of Helen's friends dropped by after a walk. She said, "I didn't see anything interesting on my walk." Helen was surprised. It made her wish she could see, even if it were for only a short time. There was so much that she would look at. This gave her an idea for an article. She called it, "If I Had 3 Days to See." This article was published in a magazine. Helen wrote that first, she would want to see the faces of all the people she loved, her family and friends. Then she would look at her house, her books, and her dogs. Finally, she would go for a long walk in the woods and look at all the new things there. She wrote that she wished she could see children playing. She would look at a sunset and gaze at the moon and the stars. She also wanted to see a stage play and a movie. Helen kept thinking about Anne's room next to her office. She felt sad to be reminded of Anne all the time. So she and Polly decided to move. They got a new house in Westport, Connecticut. The Second World War had started, and this saddened Helen. She remembered her friends in Japan. That country was now considered America's enemy. Many soldiers in Europe and the Pacific were blinded from their war wounds. President Roosevelt asked Helen if she would visit them. So, Helen went and comforted these men in hospitals all over the country. She told them that they could still work and be productive members of society. You can learn to read and to work again, she told them. You must learn to be a part of the world and not outside of it. For many of these soldiers, Helen's words brought them new hope and courage. After many years, World War II finally ended. The year was 1945. Helen and Polly decided to go to Europe to help the blind there. One evening in Rome, Polly told Helen some bad news. Their house in Connecticut had burned down. All of their belongings had been destroyed. Worst of all, Helen's book about her teacher Anne was gone. Helen had been working on that book for several years, and it had been almost finished. The very first thing I will do when we get back is to start that book again, said Helen. When Helen and Polly returned to Westport, their friends helped them build a new house. When they moved into it, many large boxes arrived. Inside were gifts from friends from all over the world. There were lamps, tables, and other furniture. Helen found a carefully wrapped present from Japan. It was a tall incense burner. The emperor had sent it as a gift to Helen. Most people retire in their 60s, but Helen Keller kept working. She made many speeches and many new friends. I cannot stop to grow old when there is so much work still to do, she said. There are still so many children around the world to help. At the age of 75, Helen traveled thousands of miles around the world. It was a little easier by plane than it had been by train. But Helen was old, and the travel was still tiring. In 1960, on Helen's 80th birthday, the American Foundation for the Blind Overseas created the Helen Keller International Award. This award was given to people who had achieved outstanding success in helping the blind. The organization also created a Helen Keller Scholarship for blind and deaf students who wanted to go to college. The day came when Helen could no longer travel. She was too old, but her spirit traveled the world through her books and the story of her life. Helen always remembered that all the recognition, honors, and awards she received were because of her teacher, Anne. Helen's first light of understanding and awareness had come from Anne. When Helen finished her book about Anne's life, it was one of the best books she had ever written. In it, Helen wrote a short poem. Teacher, and that was all. It will be my answer in the dark when death calls.